Okay. Well, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning to you all, wherever you are listening to us. It's my pleasure to bring you this webinar on driving institutional growth with internationalisation. My name is Delia Heneghan. I'm Director of Education at Sannam S4 in India, and I am joined today by two colleagues who are extremely well known in our sector, and who I'm really looking forward to listening, as their expertise and insight I think will be extremely valuable to all of us. So thank you very much for joining. It's our pleasure, and I'm now going to introduce our two panelists. Firstly, I will introduce Dr. Varghese, who is the Vice Chancellor of the Institute for International Planning and Administration in India, and is an eminent speaker, writer, and expert in this area of internationalisation for many decades, and is highly sought after as an advisor and speaker in this space. He has worked for many, many years with UNESCO and other government bodies, and has published widely. Welcome, Dr. Varghese. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. I'm also joined by Professor Marmolejo, who again has equally extensive expertise in this area. He is currently the educational advisor to the Qatar Foundation, previously having been with the World Bank and their advisor on higher education and tertiary education. Before that, he was an academic both at the University of the Americas in Mexico, University of Massachusetts, and the University of Arizona. And like Dr. Varghese, is widely published and a sought-after speaker in this space. So thank you so much, Francisco, for joining us today and agreeing to share with us your insights into this important topic.
My pleasure, Delia.
The format for today, for everyone to have an understanding of, is I'm going to ask our panelists to speak to us for about 10 minutes each, to share with us their insights into this topic, the things that are of key importance to them today, where we are in a world that is very much changed than the world we were in 3 months ago. None of us anticipated the impact of this pandemic. I think everyone's risk registers probably had something there, but nothing anywhere so extensive. And this has the potential to fundamentally change how we approach internationalisation. I think that good things will come out of it, but also challenges, of course, and our panelists are well placed to share their insights into this with us. We will then have some further discussion between the panelists, and then at the end an opportunity for questions from the audience. So please do post your questions in the chat box and we will pull the questions off from there. So thank you so much, and I'm now going to ask Professor Marmolejo to open our session with his comments and views on the topic to get us started. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Delia, and for sure, this is a time extremely extraordinary, completely unique, and of course also fully unexpected by everybody, you know, in the entire society. Probably with the exception of the specialist on virology in health, you know, for all of us was quite a surprise. And there is no exception in education, in higher education, and in internationalization of higher education. So I have been, you know, I've had the privilege of speaking in a lot of events of people working on internationalization in higher education in the world. And I have been making the point that, you know, it is important to keep in mind that what we are facing right now, it is a problem that, you know, in a way we were seeing the signals in the past. So internationalization has been, particularly in the case of India, but in many countries as well, a relatively marginal concept. It is not precisely you know, it's paradoxically that in one way it seems to be on the top of the agenda of governments, but on the other side, I might say from the practical standpoint, it is not. You know, in the rhetoric is there, but in the actions doesn't seem to be the case. There are significant misconceptions, I might say, about internationalization of higher education that are very prevalent today in many countries, and again, India is not the exception. For instance, there is this typical misunderstanding that internationalization is just about mobility of people. And I will say even more specifically, it is just about attracting people to the system rather than seeing this from a systemic point of view in a flow of students out and students in, scholars in and scholars out. So that is not the case. It is much more seen as part of that type of idea. Secondly, many times it is confused internationalization with rankings. And India has a significant obsession for rankings, and higher education institutions are truly obsessed with the idea of rankings, both nationally and internationally. And every time that an institution reaches a particular milestone or on either being included in whatever ranking, immediately there is a lot of buzz, a lot of noise about the fact that now finally my institution is on the rankings. And also every time that institutions in India are dismissed from the rankings, there is also an uproar in the country about the fact that the rankings don't reflect the reality of the Indian system of higher education. And again, the obsession on rankings is there, and many times internationalization is confused with that. Now, the other misconception is that there is this idea that internationalization is about signing of MOUs. And, again, institutions are very happy signing MOUs and then making a lot of noise about it. There are big events in which the significant milestone of the event is how many MOUs were signed. And always I have kind of joked about that by saying that the degree of internationalization of a university is inversely proportional to the number of MOUs that it has signed. Now, the other final and big misconception that exists in India is that internationalization can be achieved by decree, can be achieved by decision of the government, can be achieved by just the willingness of some eminent people, including Professor Varghese and Francisco Marmolejo, saying that now it is the time to do internationalization. And many times governments do that. I remember during my time in India, many times MHRD made big declarations about now we are in the world leagues. Now we are establishing institutions of eminence because they will become world-class universities. And now we are, make a big difference in the world of higher education by establishing study in India as the key strategy that is going to attract a lot of people from all over the world. And students don't come. So what happens? Well, because I guess the impression is that there is, again, significant misconception about what do we mean by internationalization. My definition of internationalization is that it is a comprehensive strategy and, of course, corresponding actions that should be put in place in the entire ethos of a university, in the day-to-day behavior of the institution, in the actions of the institutions aimed at truly providing an international experience, expertise, and awareness to all students, not only the most privileged ones. That's the way I see internationalization. And when I see that, then I guess that's where I see the big problem in India, but at the same time, the big opportunity. Because I truly believe that in this crisis, there is a unique momentum for realigning higher education all over the world, to reimagining a new higher education all over the world, and to embed internationalization not as a goal, but as a means towards a more relevant higher education that India can put in place. People may argue that I'm excessively naive and optimistic in suggesting this, but I truly believe that if we don't do it now, it will be very difficult to do it in normal times. So I will stop, and then I will ask Professor Varghese, I'm sure probably may contradict what I say, because that's the idea. We cannot hear you, Delia.
No, I'm just coming up. Thank you so much, Francisco. And I really do buy into that thing about MOUs. I used to think I could paper my wall with the number of MOUs I used to have. Professor Varghese, would you like to respond and maybe agree or disagree with some of those comments?
Thank you very much. Let me take my 5 minutes. That is what is
allocated. Sorry, I exceeded my 5 minutes. I apologize.
You can have 5 to 10 minutes. That's not a problem.
Sorry?
We want to hear you both. Please take as long as you need.
Oh no, that's okay. I basically agree with many of the points that Francisco made, and one of the important points that he made is that there is a confusion that is existing, that globalization and internationalization is associated with mobility. And that is not always true. That is also because under the GATS framework, we talk about 4 forms of mobility: mobility of programs, mobility of students, mobility of teachers, and mobility of institutions. So it is closely associated with the cross-border mobility. So my understanding is that internationalization does not necessarily associate only with the mobility issues, because if you're talking about the student mobility, globally the mobility is only 2% of the students mobile, 98% of the students study in their own countries. If you talk about India, only 0.8% of the students from India are mobile abroad. But essentially, the 2 points or 2 or 3 points that I would like to make as an initial comment is that the issue is that how do you maximize knowledge production? And knowledge production should prioritize any geographical or territorial issues. My feeling is that in the given context, perhaps knowledge production need not have to be territorialized. And therefore, I will say that knowledge is mostly produced nationally by the institutions in one location, but it is shared globally. So what is also to be understood is that while knowledge is a public good, the institutions producing knowledge are not public goods necessarily. And that creates a problem. The issues related to trade, the issues related to pricing, the issues related to cross-border mobility, etc., comes from these characteristics. The knowledge and the institutions or the engagements or the activities involved with the knowledge are more commercial in nature, whereas knowledge itself need not have to be commercial unless one tries to constrain it and make it as a market-oriented one. A related point is that what is to be understood in the context of internationalization is that no country in the world possesses enough knowledge base to create an educational system of their own or a curriculum of their own. So therefore, we will not find any country in the world which does not borrow ideas and knowledge from other countries. Or in other words, the human survival and maximization of knowledge production depends upon not the knowledge that you produce, but your capacity to use, absorb, and assimilate the knowledge that is produced elsewhere. So knowledge production by you and your capacity and competency to produce knowledge or to use knowledge that is produced elsewhere, that will define the total quantity of knowledge that can be enjoyed by a citizen, a group of people or citizens of a particular nation. So therefore, whether it is Indian education or any other systems of education which claims to have traditional knowledge in larger quantity and good quality knowledge, even there they have to be a little more humble to say that we have produced enough knowledge, we have a lot of knowledge, but at the same time our knowledge becomes more flourishing and our knowledge becomes more rich when we listen to others and we listen to the knowledge that is produced. In the context of internationalization, I will say that I like to divide this into 4 stages in which internationalization takes place. One is the old one, traditional medieval period, when seeking knowledge was one of the most important dimensions of internationalization. But I'll go back to the saying that in the post-colonial period and post-World War period of reconstruction stage in Europe and other issues, what we find is that the internationalization element in higher education especially was seen as a way of extending diplomatic relationships. And you find that a lot of fellowships, whether it is by UK, whether it is by USA, or it is by Germany and many other countries, came into existence as a promotion of or extension of diplomatic relations and an extension of foreign trade or foreign aid, not trade, foreign aid to the countries. That was the way that one is trying to see it. Then the government to government interactions became negligible and market entered into the force, and that is how internationalization became a market mediated process and a globalization process. So we forgot about talking about internationalization. If you see in the 1985 to 1990s and 2000 beginning, we were talking more about globalization, and this mobility part, which Francisco very rightly emphasized, became the major concerns in all the places and all the countries. So it's a globalization. The fourth change is what you are talking about now in the COVID stage, where everything is internationalized, including the disease itself. And you find that globalization has a meaning. And if you go to any institution today, including ours, what you find is that everybody has moved away from face-to-face interaction to technology-mediated online digital courses, etc. So this is a change that was forced on us, and as a result of that, we are closing the borders not only of between countries, but also of the institutional border that you are talking about, the institutional territorial border that we drawn for each of the institutions. It makes a substantial difference in terms of the changes that you are talking about. But I would like to make, as a first instance, there are, so far as India is concerned, India has not yet reached a stage where higher education can be treated or traded. That is not the stage in which India is talking about, because there are two elements to this. One is that India is the second largest sending country of students, and most of the students are going to United States, UK, and Australia. In the United States used to account for around 85% of the students in the 1980s. Now they account only for 44% of the students. So there is a decline. So there is a shared market. Now why I'm making this point is that there are only 47,000 students coming to India. So which means that, if you are 1/6 of the students that are going abroad for studies in India only come to India for studies. So this is an area of concern for India. So my question is that, let me put a question. The question in India that needs to be closely analyzed is that what do we want to internationalize it? We want to internationalize higher education in India, or do we want to internationalize Indian education? So these are two different things, and this is also politically perhaps a little more sensitive issue that I am raising about it. So one group of people feel that we should internationalize Indian education. So one tries to see internationalization as a way by which making education India as a hub, bringing more students to India, and issues related to that, and Indian studies should be promoted in the universities abroad, etc. This is one part of it. The other part is that when you talk about internationalization of higher education in India, I feel that a good focus should be on curriculum changes that you are talking about. Why? Because 98% of the, or 99.2% of the students in India do not go abroad for studies. So if you are going to make a quantum change in terms of the international orientation of the higher education system in the country, then I feel that each student who is coming, he or she is coming to the system, should be benefited by our attitude towards internationalization. So therefore, my humble request or submission is that I'll be coming to the institutional strategies at a later stage in the discussion, is that we need to focus more on the curriculum changes. So for example, let me also tell you that, there are two models of internationalization in the context of globalization is operating throughout the world. One is that high cost and high returns. The other is low cost and low returns. The students from India or China or Korea or Saudi Arabia going to United States or UK or to Australia, they belong to the first category of high cost and high return. But the students coming to India, they belong to the category of low cost and low return. And this is one of the reasons why India is not in a position to attract many students. People are ready to move towards a pathway which is high cost, high return, rather than trapped in a pathway which is low cost, low return. So India is not, coming back to the main point that I made earlier, India does not belong to a globalization process of higher education, where higher education is treated as a commodity to be traded. More importantly, India tries to see internationalization as a process by which it can expand its influence, its soft power through diplomatic relationships. And that is one of the reasons why India has enhanced the number of fellowships available to foreign students. And also you find that a large number of programs promoting internationalization is introduced in India. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Varghese. You've given us so much to, both of you have given us so much to talk about. I'm just wondering where we should start to focus in on that. And I think, as somebody who came into internationalization outside of India, I can very much agree with the points that you are making as to the drivers for internationalization in the 90s. Certainly was around income generation for destination countries, and also that soft power, that soft diplomacy. And now when you are listening and reading all of the assessments of impact of COVID on higher education sectors around the world, a lot of it is expressed in terms of how much the economic impact of the loss of international students is going to make on those institutions. So it is very much a key part of that internationalization story that we have all been part of and been watching. Is those income flows, those revenue flows around the world. But for me, that is not the key driver for what could be achieved through internationalization, which I think are some of the points that you have both been making in your opening remarks. But I wonder, could I just sort of pick up on this point about, so in India, what could be the strategies? What can an institutional strategy look like that would deliver an internationalization with impact, that would make a difference to those 98%, because they're the ones that I think it is important to focus on as to how we can make a difference to their lived educational experience by embracing internationalization, and how can it make a difference, or will it make a difference? This might be all nice to talk about, but in reality, what will be the difference that it will make, and how can institutions start to deliver some of that impact?
I don't know, Varghese, you want to mention, but I think there are a number of things that need to be in place in order for that to happen. On one way, of course, an important convincing of government about a more comprehensive understanding of internationalization and support towards that, it is important. And I don't mean support by the means of more money, but support in terms of the signal, the messaging, the willingness and the interest in pushing a system into that particular direction. The second one, of course, at the institutional level. At the institutional level, also there is, again, this significant misconception, and also this significant sort of conflicting views of what needs to be done. So I think institutions of higher education should put in place good, strategic planning processes aimed at embedding internationalization as a key element of their day-to-day life. And then, of course, the third thing has to do with awareness and training to the teachers. So Varghese was making the point about the importance of the curriculum reform. Well, there is no doubt that unless the curriculum of institutions is modified, allowing for that international dimension being added into the day-to-day teaching learning of the institutions, by degree, it will not happen, especially in the country where there are significant restrictions on what you can teach as a teacher, because there are regulations that are preventing for that to happen. For the case of non-universities, but the case of technical colleges, for instance, especially affiliated colleges, which is a significant share of the total enrollment in tertiary education in India. Decisions about the curriculum are not made by the teachers, are not even made by the institution, are made by the affiliating affiliating university. So unless that type of awareness exists at that level, those type of things won't happen. And then finally, another element, which in my opinion is fundamental, is a very, very serious review of the whole regulatory environment, not only in terms of government regulations, but also in terms of the third-party organizations. In this particular case, University Grants Commission or AICTE as key players into the definition of the policies of government. Now, there is interesting hope. I'm aware of an effort that the Association of Indian Universities has in place at this point to create a network of people working on international education in higher education institutions in India. The idea of creating some type of, NAFSA higher education India or something like that, it is already been discussed. And I know about that because I was kindly invited by the association to be part of a task force that is working on this. This is a good signal of hope because, of course, also highly needed is the professionalization, I might say, of the individuals working towards international education at the institutional level. There is a lot of knowledge that needs to exist. This is a profession that has become increasingly sophisticated, and also there is a lot of networking that needs to happen between individuals working on this in order to build proper coalitions for a more effective presence of India in the global stage.
Professor Dr. Varghese, can
I come in?
Yes, please do.
See, I agree with many of the important points that are made by Francisco. So let me elaborate on one or two issues that he highlighted. One is the issue related to the policy framework. That is what he started with. And I will say that internationalization as an intentional effort was not part of the education policy in India. We had two education policies in 1968 and 1986. And I don't think that internationalization was a priority there. And I do not think even the word internationalization was used even in this policy. So that was not the case. So internationalization as an effort is done in this century perhaps, or towards the end of 1990s in India. So it's a recent policy change, especially by the UGC, the first time they started talking about, which later developed into Study in India program. That's in the late 90s that it has happened. Now, secondly, even by some of the policy regulations in India, India can admit, each institution can admit 10% of their students, total enrollment as foreign students. That rule is there, that regulation is there, which means that India should have had at least 3.7 million foreign students in India. As of now, as I mentioned, we have only 47,000. So it is not the policy alone that is the case, because if you want to go ahead with that, there is no problem. Even these 47,000 students who are coming, a majority of them are from South Asia, and it led by Nepal, and also from countries from Africa. So we do not attract so many students from the developed world. Now, here is the issue that, what is happening is also because we need to look into some of the institutional structures that facilitates coming, staying, studying, mobility, etc. One issue that I would like to highlight is that, say for example, if you get a degree from India, when an Indian student is going to United States, as I mentioned, it's a high cost but high return. There is a possibility that the student can get employment at a higher salary in United States. But if a foreign student is coming to India, and studying in India, the employment opportunities in India are not only good, but also it is not open to the students who complete their graduation studies in India. So that one has to see that this is not an educational issue. This is an issue goes beyond the educational sector, and this is an issue which goes beyond the educational institutions. Why and how this can be done is an issue that is very important. A second issue is that many countries in the world have what we call as a higher education qualification framework, whereby the skills to be acquired and the skills that can be certified are very clearly defined based on the Dublin descriptions. Unfortunately, in India, till today, we have not developed higher education qualification framework, because if that is developed, then your degree or your competency will not be based on the number of years that you spent in a particular institution. It will be based on the skills that you acquired and the competency that you have already having. Third one, I will say that there is a need for improvement of infrastructural facilities. Even when you say that 47,000 students are coming to India, they are coming only to limited number of institutions. They come to Karnataka, one region, Karnataka, Bangalore, and that region. They come to Pune, they come to Andhra Pradesh, some limited number of places, they come to. They are not spread across. One is that the facilities that are provided, the hostel facilities, the living facilities, and other facilities need to have a quantum jump. Why I'm making this point is that if you visit some of the private universities, you find that the number of students, foreign students in some of the private, I'm not generalizing it, some of the very good, well-run private universities, you find that it is quite good. And in those universities, when I inquired about it, and I also found that they have prepared or they have made separate hostels for the foreign students. Although I'm not somebody who is asking for a separate hostels for foreign students, I feel that internationalization will be more effective when they socialize and living together with Indian students. But at the same time, unless we make an overall improve in the living conditions and infrastructural conditions in the hostels, it is something that is very, very important. A fourth one, I'll say that, UNESCO has already passed the Convention of Recognition of Qualifications, and India needs to ratify that qualification recognition. A fifth point I will try to say is that India does not permit independent branch campuses. That means no university, even if it's a great university, they will not be permitted to operate independent branch campuses. I think the new policy on education perhaps may be changing this rule or changing this law, and we may be welcoming institutions. But many Indian institutions are operating branch campuses abroad. So for example, if you go to UAE, United Arab Emirates, you'll find 4 or 5 Indian institutions having campuses.
For that matter.
And if you go to Mauritius, you find that, So my point is that in the context of internationalization, if our institutions are going abroad, we should also permit other institutions to come and create a conditions of competition and equal treatment, what you call most favored, in the international trade language, what we call as the most favored nation, status, who should get it, and that part becomes very important. Let me also end by saying that the fee levels are very low, cost of living is very low in India. Then why the students are not coming to India in large numbers, and the higher education institutions are not that bad. It may not be, when compared with the best institutions in the world, India may not be ranking very high as very clear in the ranking, if you take the global ranking, but India also has very good number of good institutions, certainly better than many institutions from where the students are coming to India.
Yeah, but Varghese, there is something that when you were talking the last comment, I remember that before I moved to India, more than almost 4 years ago, I remember speaking with people and also educated people from different parts of the world, and I remember telling I'm moving to India. And the initial kind of reaction from a lot of people was like, oh my God, what happened to you? It's like in a way you are being punished, for going to India. And I said, what is the problem? So I mentioned this because I think there is also a factor, Varghese, that even goes beyond what institutions can do, but I think it needs to be considered and put over the table, which is the factor of the many stereotypes and misconceptions that exist globally about India as a country. So, and I think it is important to keep that in mind, because again, if we talk about a comprehensive strategy, that includes also an effort of entities that apparently have nothing to do with education, such as the Ministry of Tourism or whatever other entity sort of selling India to the world, making a different effort in trying to also to sell the idea that India is many more things, is not many more things, and also is a good destination for academic, thriving. And I think that is something that again is missing. I mentioned the case of the participation of Indian institutions in the international fairs of higher education, where many of those deals of connecting partners, identifying partners, and putting together initiatives that eventually will result in interinstitutional collaboration and student and faculty mobility and joint research and et cetera. So you see, and I'm sure that Varghese, you have been in many of those gatherings of the, European Association for International Education, APAE, NAFSA, AIEA, etc. India is literally absent from the map. And whenever India is there, which once in a while it happens, well, you go to the place and it doesn't seem to be highly attractive. It doesn't represent what India is. You see this very, rigid, bureaucrats from some institutions with a very formal tie, etc., waiting for people to come, and nobody goes there because you find other, stands much more exciting and a lot of collegiality, etc. And then the participation of Indian higher education, presenting the case of India on those large fora of international education, most of the time is literally absent. If you go to the program of, again, NAFSA annual meeting, which is a large gathering of 10,000 international educators from all over the world, you see how many sessions are about India. And you may find that there is only probably one or two or even none. So I think we need to make more the case about the great things that Indian higher education has, and also, of course, about the challenges that the system has, and also, of course, to build those bridges of collaboration and those networks that result in this type of action that eventually helps institutions to internationalize.
Francisco, you are absolutely right. This question of image of India and improving image of India is a necessary, essential condition as an initial step towards expanding our domain of internationalization. Let me make 2 points. One is that Indian students are performing very well in the institutions abroad. Those who are migrating
Absolutely.
from India.
That's big prestige of that. You're right. They are the best ambassadors and champions.
So that's true. If you take the spelling competition in the world and the American spelling competition that is held every year, the first, second, and sometimes first, second, and third are by Indian students. So Indian students are highly respected. They are highly competitive, and they are considered to be very good. Indian professors are also highly respected in most of the countries because their knowledge base, their publications, and so this is highly respected. Unfortunately, Indian institutions do not have that image. So the challenge for internationalization of Indian education is that how do we enhance? That's where I come back to some of the very right points made by you. How do we enhance the image of Indian institutions? Let me say that the number of students coming to India were rather very small 8,000 to 10,000, etc. Then we see a sudden jump. And one of the reasons for this jump is also that there is a change in the image. And if you see the largest number of students coming to India, a good share is going to a state called Karnataka. And Bangalore is the capital of Karnataka. What has happened is that with the IT revolution that has taken place and Bangalore becoming an internet capital of India, so there is a notion that, you know, if you go to Karnataka or if you go to India, you will be technologically one. So the point that I'm trying to say is that IT sector has tried to change the image of India, and you find that it attracts a good number of students, because, you know, the IT sector in India is compared with the IT sector in the advanced countries. Similarly, we have Indian institutes of technologies or Indian institutes of management, which are also very highly placed institutions in the field of technology and in the field of management. So therefore, there is an image, but this image needs to be changed. And here it is not the education sector. I feel what you are saying is absolutely true. Yeah. We have met in Washington or New York and many other places, but I very rarely see an Indian in many of the meetings that I attend, you know, as you rightly pointed out, you know. So it is true that, so there is a need to change that, and there perhaps more intervention from the part of the government. Government supported participation for Indian faculty members to present themselves in the international conferences. You know, we should be a little more liberal, so that collectively, not immediately, over a period of time, this image will be changed. That is what I feel.
You know, something that I'm sorry, Delia, you know, talking about what Varghese mentions, something that really intrigues me, and again, the crisis of the pandemic may change that narrative, and I think again that's another intriguing situation. Indian students who go abroad, the ones that still represent a significant share of international enrollment globally, what I have found intriguing, at a difference of other countries, Varghese, is that they don't have any attachment to the Indian higher education system. So they were, most of the cases, students up to the high school level, which one of the reasons they decided to go out is because their parents don't believe that higher education in India is good. You know, and also because their parents have the capacity or find the means for those students to go out, right? So since there is not that attachment with the higher education system in India, that's where I see this significant disconnect. That's on one side. And that is not what happens in other parts of the world. In other parts of the world, you have lots of students which are regular students of the regular higher education institutions that either go out for one semester or a year, but they are attached to those institutions in the home country, or they go out once they finish their undergraduate education for graduate education abroad. In the case of India, as we know well, a great majority of students who are Indian students abroad are undergraduate students, not graduate students. And again, those undergraduate students don't have any attachment or any positive feelings, I might say, about the higher education institutions in India. Now, because of the crisis, we know that many of those students won't go abroad. A number of them have decided to postpone their plans to go abroad for 1 year, but the great majority already have decided to cancel their plans, which means that they will become students in higher education in India, where we don't know, but wherever they go, this is a unique opportunity to find that attachment on that generation of students, which will become, you know, a product, if you want, of the higher education system of India, and consequently, but they have the drive to go out. So I think it is an opportunity. Again, it's just something that it doesn't have too many scientific basis, but it is just part of my observation when I was in India.
I think
you are absolutely right. Even if you do a research study, empirical study, the conclusions will not be different from what Francisco told you. Know? So this is, you are absolutely true. And it's also that India census is the second largest sending country in the world. We sent around 305,000 students. That is a total number of Indian students studying abroad. But what is more important to notice is that this flow that is taking place of the Indian students, as you rightly pointed out, are for undergraduate studies, a majority of them, and they are the students who never had an experience in higher education in India.
Yeah, that's right. They are.
So they had their school education, and they are mostly from the English medium schools and the elite private schools. Then only they can compete with internationally, globally, compete for the admission test, etc. So they come from not the regular cultural milieu of India or the common cultural milieu of India. They belong to the elite group and upper middle class families. And let me also say that it may sound a little presumptuous, but let me say that not all. Many of the students who are going abroad for studies are also the students who do not get admission to some of the prestigious institutions in India.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So because getting admission, when you have around 110 million students pass out of the higher secondary education system every year, and when you have to select only around 5,000 students to the most prestigious institutions, and you can imagine the intensity of the competition. So people find that getting admission in a reasonably good university abroad is much easier than getting admission to the most prestigious institutions within India.
Back more.
Most may be much lower. Sorry?
And it pays back more. And it pays back more, as you say.
Yes. So you find that so there is a difference in terms. They do not have any experience, but at the same time, the migration that takes place at the later stage, what is important is the migration pattern of India, or what we call as Indian diaspora. We have around 32 million people staying abroad in India, and we get around $70 billion, $69.9 billion as returns every year, and this is the latest figure for 2019-20. So what does it mean? The returns are very high, and money that is sent back, the students who went from here became employees there, or what we call as the famous H-1B visa. The Indians are going to be most severely affected by the Trump's policy of reducing or dismantling with the H-1B visa, because that is where the visa system whereby most of the educated Indians educated from the Indian universities migrated, and those who educated in United States and UK and other abroad, who went abroad, went to these places. So what is to be understood is that why the Indian students do not want to return immediately. One of the reasons is that they invest heavily for a degree in USA or UK or Australia. They invest very, very heavily, which is several hundred times more than the per capita income of India. And now, unless they stay for 6 to 7 or 8 years in that country and earn, they will not be earning the investment. They will be making returns to the investment that they have made. So this is the psychology, and this is the economics, and this is the rationality or commercial rationality based on which Indian students go abroad. That's why I wanted to emphasize what rightly you pointed out in the beginning. We should not confuse internationalization with mobility. So that is the case when we talk about the MOOC courses. India has the second largest number of enrollment in MOOC courses, where there are no student mobility. It's only the program mobility. I'll stop here.
No, I think I wanted to pick up there, Professor Boxey, because we have a number of questions. You have sort of you've got people who are wanting to contribute to the debate, and one of those questions is about they're saying that that could we talk a little bit more about the other three modes of internationalization? So could we move away from the topic of student mobility and talk a little bit more about those three other modes that I think you mentioned? Now we've only got a few minutes. I've got four questions here. So if we could maybe take.
Why don't you mention the other questions, Delia, and then we try to.
And then you can try and build them up. Two questions cover the same area. How can basic infrastructure be developed for quality higher education that would drive internationalisation? So how can the institutions compete both in terms of faculty and facilities to compete with international standards? And then the final question is, how can we push for a larger population of youth getting educated? So how can we increase the gross enrollment ratio, but while at the same time trying to attract international students? So I think that final question is saying India maybe has bigger challenges than internationalization can answer. And I would really like to hear your views on that particular topic, because I think it is not necessarily the case. But I would over to you both, if you could address some of those issues in those questions in our final 10 minutes.
Professor Barkis, it's your turn.
So I will say that the first question was about other modes of mobility. What I mean to say is that program mobility is something that is very much appreciated in India, and it is very prevalent. As I mentioned earlier, India has the second largest number of students enrolled in the MOOC courses. I'm not talking about completion, I'm talking about entry level and enrollment, and that is also because of the reason that the language proficiency of a larger number of students, although in terms of the share of students in India who can proficiently manage and accommodate and communicate in English may be less, but in terms of absolute numbers, even a small share is large to make a larger market. So that is what India also has, systems like what we call as a Swayam and a platform, and based on which we also offer courses. Now we find that the demand for that has increased. A second dimension that is related to the third mode is that of the institutional mobility. I mentioned India till today has not permitted foreign institutions to come and operate independent campuses, but there are many cooperative ventures and there are also many collaborative ventures that are taking place, and especially those institutions which are highly placed in terms of the prestige and quality. You will find this. A third dimension that needs to be done is about the faculty movement, which you also mentioned, and I would like to emphasize here that a large number of Indian faculty members are working abroad, and they are working in very many good universities. We do not find that many faculty members coming to India. India started certain programs called GYAN, a recent program that was introduced, Global Initiative for Mobility, and you find that a good number of nearly 2,000 foreign professors came and taught in Indian universities in the last 1 year. This was more important for Indian students and Indian institutions to enhance their quality. Similarly, there are programs like Spark, where you find that there is a lot of emphasis on research collaborations to be developed. And one thing that needs to be noted is that all the top ranking institutions in India have a good share of faculty members either trained abroad or have been in collaboration with the renowned professors and institutions abroad. So internationalization in that sense has helped India. And if you want to go a little further, immediately after independence, all the Indian Institute of Technology, which is the most prestigious institution that were established in India, all were established in collaboration with international agencies or international countries. In other countries, that was a government-to-government arrangement, whether it is Russian government, whether it is British government, whether it is German government, or whether it is US government. We had good interactions. That was a process of internationalization, and some of these traditions are maintained. So there is a need for the faculty exposure. And now what the government of India is trying to do in the next stage is that what they call as the GYAN 2 is that they are providing opportunity for Indian professors to teach a semester or a course abroad, and aligning themselves with, collaborating themselves with the professors in some of the good universities abroad, and India is ready to invest that. So this is a new change. And we are also trying to give nearly 500,000 fellowships, scholarships for foreign students to come and study in India. So these are the very positive initiatives from the public policy point of view, and also from the financial point of view, and also from the regulatory point of view to facilitate internationalization. That's why I said that, so today internationalization of higher education is or has become an important dimension of policy and regulations and programs in India. This is of nearly 20 or 25 years old. It is not in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, when many countries had a prescribed policy of internationalization. At the institutional level, even today, we do not have an international unit or a department to deal with the international students. Some universities have, they have more students. So when you're talking about the students, they should be put into least troubles. They should be given opportunities to come. These are some of the things which we can initiate, whereby the flow of students, and as I told you that it should be attractive. Curriculum also needs to be changed and internationalized so that it becomes attractive. Say, for example, Indian institutions operating in Dubai, they follow an international curriculum. Their curriculum, so the students are coming to study there. So we need to have a more detailed discussion on this. It is not only an educational issue. Internationalization of higher education in India is not only an educational issue. It is also an issue where the policy framework related to non-educational and non-higher education institutions should be involved.
I will ask Professor Marmalay if you would like to respond to some of those questions.
Yes, interestingly, I will have to be back into my initial remarks because, and this is not uncommon, we always mention that internationalization should be more than just student mobility, more than just attracting international students or those type of things. And at the end of the day, we just keep talking about that. And even many of the comments that both Varghese and I made were related to that. So we, forgot what we were saying initially on the fact that internationalization should be more than that. That internationalization should touch the life not only of those small numbers of students, but to our regular day-to-day students in our institutions, and that is not happening. And one of the big problems is that there are a number of inertias, I might say, in the higher education system that prevent that type of flexibility in embedding the international dimension into the education of our students in India. And we don't talk about that. So again, what possibility could have an institution to add that global dimension in the preparation of the students? Is very limited because the system is extremely rigid. So that needs to be addressed, not only because the internationalization side, but because many of the other topics, subjects for which students need to be prepared for a new world. The Indian system is highly respected, but is highly devoted to content, and it produces excellent graduates with significant technical skills, no doubt about it, the best in the world from the best institutions in India, not the regular institutions in India. But in the side of the soft skills, poorly performing. And one of the reasons is because the way the educational system constrains the teaching learning process, limits heavily the capacity of students to develop their own, self-motivation, critical thinking, team working, and many of those skills that are equally important as the technical skills. I remember when I was in India about a study conducted with Stanford University showing very clearly that India, in comparison to other countries, does very well on the technical side of teaching of students, but very badly, and it doesn't improve a lot in the other side of the soft skills that, again, are going to be very important for the board. The final thing that I like to mention, because we have only 1 minute, there was a question about infrastructure. And I think there is no doubt that more investment needs to be made in infrastructure in higher education, not because the international students, but in order to provide dignified conditions to our regular students. You know, most institutions, including the very prestigious institutions, when you go there, you see that unfortunately facilities are highly dilapidated, and that maintenance is not precisely a topic that it goes into the top of the priorities, among other reasons because institutions don't have the capacity to do that. They don't have the way to have, you know, flexible resources that can be devoted to that. There are some schemes of the government that have been identified, including the, you know, the HIFA program, the institutions of eminence, etc., etc. The big problem in India is that numbers always are mind-blowing. If you might have 25 institutions of eminence, but then you have, you know, 42 other tertiary education institutions that are not part of that list, which are, by the way, where the majority of students are being prepared. So again, it's not an easy task. I'm sure that it is not easy, but I should finish by saying that I truly believe in the ingenuity and the capacity and the sort of the great innovation capacity that the Indian society has. And that should be more effectively capitalized in making sure to transition India towards a much more, you know, a highly internationally rewarded system of higher education, not because the sake of prestige in comparison to other parts of the world, but more important, because that means that students, regular students, not only international students, are being prepared in this new setting. Can I dream about that? Yes, I am entitled to do that. And I hope that that may be possible.
Well, it is always great for us to finish with us having a dream that we can go after. So thank you so much, both of you. It's been an absolute pleasure. We could have taken so much longer talking about this. We've got lots and lots of questions. What I'm going to say is that I will have these typed up. We will share them with you if you don't mind, and ask for a few bullet point notes back, and then we will circulate them so that we can answer those questions for everybody. I know, Professor Marmolejo, you have to leave because you have another meeting, so we can't extend this session. I have been left with so much to think about. I think that some of the takeaways for us who've been listening to you is that there is much to be done, that it will be delivered through collaboration, that the government has an important role to play in setting the regulatory framework that is needed to drive some of these changes forward, that we will need to professionalize the thinking around internationalization and the professional colleagues who are delivering that. So setting up international departments in universities that can help drive some of these changes. And it's fantastic to hear about the work that's being done at the AIU in that space, because that can be a real driver for change at grassroots level, where you will see the impact that will disseminate for those larger group of students than those who can choose to take that study abroad. Things like the shorter term study abroad programs, I think you're seeing that starting to develop now in India, where before it was something that didn't happen. So there are lots of changes happening. There's lots of people committed to this. And I think we will see change accelerate now as one of the outcomes of COVID, as I think you both said at the beginning, that this pandemic will be a driver for change. We will see increased collaboration and partnerships, and we will start doing things with those MOUs instead of papering our wall with them. So thank you so much, both of you. I look forward to speaking again. Thank you so much for everyone who's been listening. We will pick up all those questions and we will get answers out to you. And we will also share the recording. So thank you so much. And please remember that this is part of a series. We will have other colleagues from different backgrounds coming to talk to us on the Sannam S4 Internationalisation webinar series. So please look out for those and join us again. We've had a fantastic session today, and I'm sure that you will join me in thanking our two panelists. Thank you so much, Dr. Varghese. Thank you so much, Professor Marmolejo. Thank you for your time. It's been
Thank you very much, Delia. Great seeing you, Professor Varghese.
We will see you all again soon, I hope. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
I think we have, yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.